The wind came down off the Bitterroot range like something with a grudge. It clawed at the highway, dragged sheets of snow sideways across the asphalt, and rocked the old Ford pickup on its tired suspension. The wipers couldn't keep up. They scraped and stuttered, leaving half-moon smears across the windshield. And beyond that glass, the world had gone white. White ghosts chasing the truck. White silence swallowing the road. Maren Holloway gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went the color of bone. The heater had quit somewhere outside Missoula, and her breath fogged in the cab, now thin and visible the way breath looks in a place where no one has lived for a long time. The fuel gauge had been hovering above empty for the last 40 miles. The orange warning light blinked at her, steady as a slow heartbeat. In the passenger seat, her boy slept. 12 years old, knees pulled up, a sleeping bag bunched around his shoulders. His head rested against the cold window, and every time the truck hit a rut, his hair brushed the glass and he stirred. But he didn't wake. Wyatt, her quiet one, her watcher. He had his father's chin, but the eyes were hers, hazel green, the color of river water in late autumn. "Mom?" His voice came soft, sleep-thick. She glanced over. His eyes were half open. "Are we almost there?" She didn't answer right away. The GPS had stopped tracking miles back. There was no signal this deep into the Bitterroot, and the road, if you could even call it a road, had narrowed into gravel and ice, winding between black pines that leaned in close on both sides like spectators at something they didn't approve of. "Almost, buddy," she said. "Just hang on." He nodded the way children nod when they want to believe their mothers. Then he closed his eyes again. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding, and the cab fell back into its own silence. Just the wipers, just the wind, just the engine straining against the climb. Her mind would not stay put. It kept slipping back to that morning. The county auction house in Hamilton, the cracked tile floor, the fluorescent buzz overhead. Folding chairs full of men in Carhartt jackets, most of them there to bid on tractors and outbuildings, none of them interested in the last lot of the day. A 40-acre parcel up by Willow Creek with a derelict cabin on it. The auctioneer had read it out the way you read out something already lost. 40 acres. Structure of unknown condition. Access road unmaintained. Minimum bid open. There had been laughter when she raised her hand. Quiet laughter. The kind that doesn't bother to hide itself because the woman raising her hand looks like she has already lost. 50 cents, she had said. The room had gone still. Then someone in the back snorted, and the auctioneer, an old man with kind eyes and a tired mouth, had looked at her for a long moment, and she had looked back, and she had not blinked. The hammer fell. 50 cents, half a dollar, half a life. It was every coin she had left in the bottom of her purse after the divorce papers and the foreclosure notice and the months of applications that never came back. The clerk had slid the deed across the counter with 2 fingers, the way you push something you don't want to touch, and Maren had folded it into her coat and walked out into the snow and told herself out loud in the parking lot that this was a sign. A 50-cent miracle. But miracles, she was learning, never came clean. They came rusted. They came with conditions. They came at the end of a road that no plow had touched. The headlights caught it then through the snow, half hidden behind a stand of dying pine. The cabin. She slowed the truck to a crawl. It was smaller than the listing photograph had suggested. The roof bowed under the weight of years of unswept snow. The porch tilted to one side as if it had been considering falling over and simply forgotten to finish. 2 of the shutters hung loose from a single hinge, each swinging in the wind like loose teeth in an old mouth. The chimney still stood. That was something. The chimney still stood, and the door was still on its frame, and the windows, though clouded with grime, were unbroken. She put the truck in park. Wyatt sat up. He rubbed at his eyes with the heel of his hand and squinted out through the windshield. "It's smaller than the pictures," he said. She almost laughed. It came out as a shaky breath. "Pictures lie, buddy. Let's go see what we bought." She killed the engine, and the silence that followed was enormous. Not the silence of empty apartments or courtroom hallways. Something older than that. Something that had been sitting up here without interruption for a very long time and was now perhaps beginning to notice them. They climbed out into the snow. It came up past her boots. Wyatt followed in her tracks, hauling the duffel that held what was left of their lives. 2 changes of clothes each, a camp stove, a sleeping bag, a tin of instant coffee, and the leather journal he had given her for her birthday 2 years before, when birthdays had still meant something. She climbed the broken porch steps carefully. The wood gave a little under her boots, soft with rot at the edges, but the boards held. She pushed the door. It groaned open like something waking up. The smell hit her first. Mildew, dust. The ghost smell of an animal, long since gone, mouse maybe, or marten. Beneath that, the dry resin smell of old pine boards. She fumbled out her flashlight and clicked it on. A single room opened in front of her. A stone fireplace split with a long crack down one side. A table broken at one leg leaning against the wall. Yellow wallpaper peeling in long strips like skin from a sunburn. Pine needles and ancient newspaper drifted across the floorboards. Something small scurried in the corner and vanished into a hole in the baseboard. "Home sweet home," she whispered. Wyatt stepped in beside her. He swung his own flashlight in a slow arc. "You really think we can fix it, Mom?" She looked at her son, 12 years old, and asking her with a perfectly straight face if she could fix a thing this broken. She smiled the way mothers smile when they are terrified. "I think we can fix anything, baby." She turned away before he could see her eyes. They built a fire that first night. The chimney drew somehow after she cleared a bird's nest from the flue with the end of a broom handle. The wood was old and dry and caught fast, and within an hour the front room was warm enough that she could take off her gloves. She set the camp stove on the broken table and heated water for instant coffee, and she drank it black, and the bitterness of it tasted like the first thing in months that belonged to her. Wyatt unrolled his sleeping bag on the cleanest patch of floor he could find and crawled inside with his clothes still on. He lay there watching the fire for a long time. She could see his eyes shining in the firelight, the way a deer's eyes shine when it stands very still at the edge of the woods. "Mom." "Yeah, buddy." A long pause. "Does Dad even know where we are?" The coffee mug paused halfway to her mouth. She lowered it. The fire popped. A sap pocket in one of the logs let go with a sharp crack, and a shower of orange sparks rose up the flue. "No," she said. "He doesn't." "Okay." That was all he said. Just okay. And then he rolled onto his side and faced the fire, and within 5 minutes, his breathing had gone slow and even, and he was gone. She sat there a long time after that, watching her son sleep, listening to the wind work at the corners of the cabin. She thought about Derek somewhere in Bozeman, probably in some apartment she had never seen with some woman she had never met. She thought about how a man could go from waking up next to you for 10 years to not knowing what state you were sleeping in. She thought about how Wyatt had said it, not angry, not sad, just okay. The way you say, okay, when you have already done your grieving in private and just need the adult in the room to confirm what you already know. She pulled out the leather journal. She uncapped her pen with her teeth. Her handwriting trembled from the cold. January 6th. Arrived at the cabin. Roof needs work. Fireplace functions. Water source unknown. Wyatt asked about his father. I told him the truth. She paused. The pen hovered. Then she wrote one more line. Tomorrow we begin. She closed the book. And that was when she saw it. The firelight had shifted, and a low orange wash of it now fell across the windowsill on the far wall. She had walked past that sill 3 times already that night without seeing it. But now in that one particular angle of light, something stood out. Letters, carved into the wood. Old weathered half worn away by decades of sun coming through that glass. She rose. She crossed the room. She crouched down and ran her fingers over the carving. S.T.H. 3 letters scraped into the pine with the patience of someone who had time. Someone who had wanted to leave a mark. The grooves were deep enough that even after all these years, she could feel them clean under her fingertip. S.T.H. She didn't know yet what those letters meant. She would not know for 2 more days. But something in her chest tightened anyway. The way it tightens when you walk into a room and realize before you can say how that someone has been there before you, that you are not the first. She traced the letters once more. Then she stood up, and she went and lay down next to her son, and she pulled her coat over both of them, and she watched the fire until it was just coals, and she did not sleep. Morning came grey and brittle. Frost edged the inside of the windows in feathered patterns. The fire had died to white ash. Maren got up stiff, every joint complaining, and rebuilt the flame from kindling and the last of the dry pine. She boiled water and made instant oatmeal, 2 packets, and they ate it sitting on the floor with the steam rising off the bowls. "Can I go look around outside?" Wyatt asked. "Stay close. You see anything whole animal track, anything you don't understand, you yell." "Okay." He pulled his coat on and went. The silence that followed was different from night silence. Day silence in the woods is busy even when it sounds empty. She could hear snow falling off branches in soft thumps. She could hear a raven somewhere up the ridge calling once then again. She set about cleaning, swept dust into piles, hauled out the broken chair, cleared a path from the door to the fireplace. Beneath the chair, mashed flat against the floorboards, she found a thin stack of receipts, brown and brittle with age. She picked one up and tilted it toward the window. The header read in faded ink, Hargrove Mining Company. She frowned. She thumbed through the rest. All the same. Hargrove Mining Company, Hamilton, Montana. The dates were the part that stopped her. 1965, 1966, 1967. Hargrove. She looked up at the windowsill. S.T.H. Outside, Wyatt's voice rang out across the snow. "Mom, come to see." She set the receipts down on the table and went. He was standing at the edge of the backyard, if you could call a slope of bare snow, a yard pointing up the ridge. The morning sun, what little of it there was, had broken low through the pines and was hitting the slope at a sharp angle, and in that angle she could see what he was seeing. Stones, flat ones, stacked in a deliberate cairn at the base of a pine, and beyond it, 50 yards further up, another. And beyond that, where the ridge began to rise in earnest, what looked like a third. "Someone built those," Wyatt said. "Maybe they're old property markers." He looked at her with the patience of a child who is humoring an adult. "Mom, they're pointing." She squinted up the ridge. He was right. They were not random. They were arranged. They led the eye one to the next up and into the trees the way a sentence leads the eye from word to word. "We'll look at it later," she said. "Help me finish inside first." He nodded. But she saw the way he kept turning his head as they walked back. The way the cans kept pulling at him. She felt it too. Inside, she went back to sweeping. She pushed her broom into a corner she hadn't touched yet behind where the broken chair had been, and the bristles dragged across the floor with a wrong sound. A hollow sound. She paused. She crouched. She set the broom aside. There was a knot in the floorboard there, large and dark, the kind a child's eye finds first in any pine board. Around it, the wood was cleaner, less worn, as if it had been replaced, as if it didn't quite match the rest of the floor. She pressed it with her thumb. The board flexed. Maren went very still. She got her multi-tool out of her jacket pocket. She slid the flathead blade into the gap between that board and the next. She pried gently at first, then harder. There was a soft creak of nails giving up their grip, and the board lifted out clean. Beneath it was dark. She clicked on her flashlight and shone it into the gap. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then quietly, "Wyatt, come here." He came over. He looked down. His mouth opened a little. Beneath the cabin floor, in a cavity no more than a foot deep, but running long in both directions along the joist, were bundles, dozens of them, wrapped in canvas darkened by oil and age, some flat and square like folders, others rigid and small like boxes. The canvas of the nearest one had been waxed at one point, and the wax had cracked, and beneath the cracking she could see paper. Old paper, heavy paper. She reached in. She lifted out the topmost bundle. It was heavier than she expected. She set it on the floor and unfolded the canvas carefully, the way you unfold something you suspect might come apart in your hands. The canvas flaked. Beneath it lay a stack of yellow documents, topographic maps, hand-annotated, tight cursive in the margins, geological survey sheets, a leather notebook bound in twine. She turned over the corner of one map. There in the bottom right was a name stamped in faded purple ink. Silas T. Hargrove. She stared at it. S.T.H. She looked up at the windowsill, across the room, at the 3 letters carved into the pine by a man who had wanted even then to leave a mark, a signature, a whisper into the grain. "Mom," Wyatt said. "Who is he?" Maren did not answer right away. Her hand was on the stamped name. She could feel her own pulse in her fingertip. "I don't know yet," she said. "But this is his work, all of this. This is somebody's whole life under our floor." They spent the rest of that day going through it, carefully, page by page. She made Wyatt log everything he could read in the back of her leather journal. Coordinates, dates, names. The maps were detailed beyond anything an amateur would have drawn. Mineral veins shaded in colored pencil, elevation contours hand-corrected in pen, small annotations like silver trace at depth 40 feet eastern shelf and water table, compromise do not drill. The leather notebook, when she eased it open, was a journal, a real one, dated entries in clean controlled cursive. August 4th, 1963. Second core sample positive. Signs of silver veining at lower elevations. Bennett pushing for signatures again. He says we cannot survive another winter without movement. I say we cannot survive selling out. She read the line twice. Bennett. She kept turning pages. October 12th, 1964. Cabin is secure. False floor complete. No one should find the materials unless they are looking. God willing, no one ever will. Maren sat back on her heels. "Mom," Wyatt said quietly. "He hid all this on purpose." "Yes." "Why?" She didn't have an answer for him. Not yet. She just looked at the floorboard lifted up and leaning against the wall now, and she thought this man was protecting something. Or he was protecting himself. Or both. That night she could not sleep. The wind had picked up after midnight and was rattling the windows in their frames, and every gust seemed to push a different question through the cabin. Who was Silas T. Hargrove? What had Bennett wanted him to sign? Why hide a life's work under a floor unless you believed someone was coming for it? And the deeper question, the one that pressed against her ribs in the dark. Why had no one found this for 60 years? Why, of all the people in the world, was it her? In the morning, she put Wyatt in the truck and drove into Hamilton. The library was a low brick building that looked like it had not been updated since 1978. Behind the front desk stood a woman in her 60s with her gray hair piled into a loose knot and reading glasses on a beaded chain. Her nameplate read N. Whitfield. Maren laid one of Silas's marked-up maps on the counter folded, so only the stamped name showed. "I'm looking for anything you have on a Silas T. Hargrove. He may have lived on a parcel up by Willow Creek, sometime in the 60s. The librarian looked at the name. Then she looked at Maren. Then she looked at the name again. "Honey," she said quietly, "you'd better come around back." Her name was Nora. She brought Maren and Wyatt into a small reading room with a single table and pulled 3 thick binders down from a shelf marked Local History Restricted. She set them down with a soft thud and opened the top one. Photographs, newspaper clippings, old land plat surveys. Hargrove, Nora said, is one of the founding mining families in this county. Marshall Hargrove opened the first operation up in the Bitterroot in 1931. Silver mostly, some copper. His sons took it over in the 50s. Bennett, the older one, ran the business side. Silas, the younger, ran the fieldwork. Geologist, trained at the Colorado School of Mines. Brilliant by every account. She turned the binder around so Maren could see. Two men in a black and white photograph standing in front of a drill rig. Both tall, both narrow-shouldered, both with the same sharp jaw and the same serious eyes. The one on the left wore a wool suit and held a clipboard. The one on the right wore canvas coveralls and held a rock hammer. "Bennett," Nora said, touching the left. Silas, touching the right. Wyatt leaned in. They look the same. That's what makes betrayal so easy. Nora said almost to herself, when it comes from someone who looks just like you. Maren felt something cold move along her spine. What happened to Silas? Nora closed the binder gently. He disappeared. March of 1971. 26 years old. There was a board dispute, a falling out with his brother. Talk of an expansion he refused to sign off on. And then 1 week, he was just gone. Truck still in the driveway at his cabin. Coffee cup still on the table. They searched the ridge for 2 months. Found nothing. The official conclusion was misadventure in the back country. Most folks around here, the ones old enough to remember, they don't believe that. What do they believe? Nora looked at her for a long moment. They believe Bennett Hargrove buried his brother somewhere on that mountain. They just never could prove it. Maren did not answer. She was looking down at the photograph again, at the younger man in the coveralls, at the rock hammer in his hand, at the carving she had touched with her own hand the night before on a windowsill in a cabin she had bought for $50. S.T.H. Silas T. Hargrove, 26 years old, brilliant gone, and now somehow in her keeping. They drove back up the ridge in silence. Wyatt watched the trees go past. Maren watched the road. The snow had started again, soft and steady, the kind that meant business. She went straight to the back of the cabin when they got home to the place where the false floor had been, and she pried up more boards. Wider this time. She didn't care now about being neat. She wanted to see all of it. She found the second hiding place under the third board. It was deeper than the first. Tucked against the foundation stone, wrapped in oilcloth, was a steel box the size of a large book. Heavy, cold. She lifted it out. She set it on the table. The latch was rusted, but it gave when she worked it with the multi-tool. Inside, neatly arranged, were folders, draft mineral rights claims. All of them stamped draft in red, none of them ever filed. Letters to the Bureau of Land Management never sent. Survey permits signed by Silas T. Hargrove dated 1969 and 1970. And at the very bottom of the box, wrapped in wax paper and sealed in red wax, an envelope. The wax bore an embossed symbol, a compass rose. Inside the central diamond of the rose, a single letter. H. She turned the envelope over in her hands. Across the back in a steady hand were no name and no address. Just a sentence. To whoever the mountain chooses next. Maren felt her throat close. Wyatt was at her shoulder. He was not breathing. She broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper folded twice. The writing on it was the same writing she had been reading all morning in the leather notebook. Steady, controlled. The handwriting of a man who had thought about every word before he set it down. I built the floor to protect what I could. The claims, the samples, the truth. They wanted to turn this land inside out. Strip it, sell it. I said no. They said they would bury me, so I buried the work instead. If you are reading this, then the cabin survived. That means maybe, just maybe, you are someone who will understand why I could not sign my name to their war on this mountain. Do not trust Bennett Hargrove, not even if he is dead. The land remembers. So should we. She read it twice. 3 times. She set the letter down. Outside, the wind had risen. The pines bent against it and let it pass. Somewhere far up the ridge, she could hear that raven again, calling once into the cold. Wyatt finally spoke. His voice was very small. "Mum, what did we just walk into?" Maren stared at the letter on the table, at the broken wax seal beside it, at the cabin's old log walls dark with 60 years of wood smoke, at her son's face pale and grave in the lamplight. She thought about a man who had been 26 years old in 1971, who had hidden a life's work under a floor, who had written a letter to no one, sealed it in wax, and left it for whoever the mountain chose next. She thought about how she had raised her hand in a county auction house that morning and bid 50 cents on a thing no one else had wanted. She reached out and took her son's hand. "We didn't just inherit a cabin, baby," she said quietly. "We inherited a fight somebody started a long time before we got here." Wyatt did not pull his hand away. The fire cracked behind them. Outside in the deepening dark, the snow kept falling on the cairns that climbed the ridge one stone at a time, pointing the way to something that had been waiting patiently for 60 winters to be found. The letter sat on the table for 2 days before Maren did anything about it. She read it again each morning with her coffee. She read it at night by the lantern. She turned the envelope over in her hands and ran her thumb across the broken wax, feeling the compass rose, worn smooth now, where her fingerprint kept finding it. "Do not trust Bennett Hargrove, not even if he is dead. The land remembers. So should we." Wyatt had stopped asking what she was going to do. He had started watching her instead, the way a boy watches a mother who is making up her mind. She would catch him sometimes from the corner of her eye, sitting at the broken table with a pencil drawing the cairns on the ridge from memory. His small shoulders bent forward, and she would think he is 12 years old, and he is already learning to wait for the adult in the room to choose. On the 3rd morning, she chose. She drove into Hamilton alone. She left Wyatt at the cabin with the fire built up, and the .22 rifle Silas had left mounted above the door, unloaded but visible. She had checked it twice. It was old but clean. Someone had oiled that gun within the last decade. She did not know yet who. At the library, she went straight to Nora Whitfield and laid a single name on the counter. "Holden Vance," she said, "environmental attorney. He worked on a case against Hargrove Mining in 1992. I need to find him." Nora looked at her over the reading glasses for a long moment. "You sure about this, honey?" "No," Maren said, "but I'm doing it anyway." Nora wrote a phone number on a slip of paper and slid it across the counter without another word. Maren called him from the parking lot. Voicemail. A clipped, dry voice that did not bother to identify itself, only the office. She left a message. "My name is Maren Holloway. I bought a cabin at auction on Willow Creek Ridge. I have found documents under the floor that belong to a man named Silas T. Hargrove. There is a sealed letter. There are unfiled claims. There are core samples. I am not asking for a consultation. I am telling you what I have, and I am asking whether you are still the kind of man who answers when someone says the name Hargrove out loud." She hung up. She drove home. He called back at sunset. His voice on the line was older than she had expected. Late 60s, maybe. Smoker wants gravel left in the throat from it. He listened to her describe the floor, the boxes, the letter. He did not interrupt. When she finished, there was a long silence, and she could hear him breathing on the other end. "I will be there tomorrow by noon," he said. "You don't want to see anything first. Mrs. Holloway, I have been waiting 30 years for somebody to call me about that name. I do not need to see anything first." He pulled up in an old white Jeep just before 12 the next day, parked it with the precise angle of a man who had been parking in mountain driveways his whole adult life, and climbed out in a wool coat that had seen 2 decades of weather. Horn-rimmed glasses, hair gone steel gray. He carried a leather messenger bag worn soft at the corners. He did not smile when he shook her hand. "Show me," he said. She showed him. He sat at the broken table for 2 hours, and he did not speak. He turned pages. He held the survey permits up to the light. He read the leather notebook with the patience of a man reading scripture. When he came to the sealed envelope and the letter inside, he read it through, then read it through again, then set it down and removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose for a long moment. Mrs. Holloway. Maren, do you understand what is sitting on this table? I understand part of it. This is the spine of a federal case, not a county dispute, not a civil suit, a federal case. Silas Hargrove documented mineral fraud, environmental violation, and the forgery of survey filings, and he put it all in one place and hid it under a floor, because he believed correctly that the people he was about to expose would kill him before they let him walk into a courthouse with it. She had known this in some part of herself since the second morning. Hearing it said out loud was something else. Can it be filed? It can, but it has to be filed correctly, and it has to be filed before anyone outside this cabin knows it exists. The instant Hargrove Consolidated catches wind that this material is above ground, they will move on it, lawyers first, then other things. What other things? He put his glasses back on. Maren, I'm going to tell you something I do not normally say to a client at the first meeting. You should put your son somewhere else for the next 2 weeks. He is not going anywhere. You do not understand what you are stepping into. Mr. Vance, she said quietly, I bought this cabin for 50 cents. With the last 50 cents I had. There is no somewhere else. There is only here. So tell me what to do next and let me do it. He looked at her for a long time across that broken table. Whatever he saw in her face seemed to settle something for him. He nodded once. All right, he said. Tomorrow we drive to the county courthouse. We file a preservation claim on the parcel citing historical environmental documentation. We do not mention Hargrove by name. Not yet. We get the claim into the public record. Once it is time-stamped, they cannot quietly bury it. Then we wait for them to react. They will react. And when they do, we will know what we are dealing with. And then, Maren, you do exactly what Silas could not. You stay alive long enough to file the rest. She drove to Hamilton the next morning with Holden in the passenger seat and Wyatt in the jump seat behind them. The clerk at the county recorder's office stamped the preservation claim at 9:46 in the morning. Holden watched the stamp come down and exhaled through his nose a small private sound. The sound of a man who had carried something heavy for a long time and had just set part of it down on a counter. It's in, he said. The clock started ticking that morning. The first thing arrived 12 hours later. They had stopped at the diner on Main Street for an early supper. Wyatt picking at a grilled cheese Holden. Reading something on his phone, Maren watching the snow fall against the front window. The waitress brought the check. She was a thin woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a small enameled pin on her collar. The pin was a stylized H inside a compass rose. She set the check down. Then she set her hand on top of it lightly and looked at Maren. You're the woman from up on Willow Creek. Maren met her eyes. Yes? That cabin's cursed, you know. People go digging up ghosts. Sometimes the ghosts dig back. She smiled when she said it. A small, thin smile. Then she walked away to the next booth. Holden lowered his phone. Maren, I heard her. That was not a waitress. I know. Wyatt had stopped eating. He was looking at the pin on the woman's collar across the room, then at his mother, then back at the pin. He did not say anything. He just slid his half-eaten sandwich toward her, the way a child does when he has decided he is no longer hungry, but wants to make sure his mother is. They drove home in the dark. A black pickup followed them out of Hamilton for 6 miles, then peeled off onto a logging road and was gone. No headlights, no plate, just presence. The next morning, Maren drove out to Lone Horse Creek to see the man Nora had named. Elias Thornwood lived in a low cedar cabin tucked into a fold of the foothills, smoke rising thin and steady from his chimney. He was waiting on the porch when she pulled up, as if he had known she was coming, which perhaps he had. 78 years old, tall still though stooped at the shoulders, white hair cropped close, a face cut from weather and patience. He had spent 40 years as a federal ranger in this country and had walked every ridge within 50 miles of where he stood. She came up the steps with a thermos of black coffee and held it out to him without speaking. He took it. He nodded once. He opened the door for her. Inside it smelled of wood smoke and cedar shavings. A pair of antlers over the door taken honest. Topographic maps tacked to the walls, some of them yellowed at the edges, hand-corrected in pencil. A black and white photograph on the mantel slightly crooked in its frame. Two young men in their 20s leaning against a survey truck. One of them was Silas. She pointed to it. "That's him. That's him." Elias agreed. His voice was quiet and worn. "Smartest man I ever knew. Most stubborn, too." She laid out what she had on his kitchen table. The maps, the notebook, the unfiled claims, the seal letter. He read in silence the way Holden had read, but slower. When he came to the line about Bennett, his mouth tightened and he set the letter down and looked out his window for a long moment at the snow on the firs. He was not paranoid, he said finally. Folks tried to say he was after he disappeared. He was not. He was a man who could read a room and see the knives before the rest of us could see the hands. "Did Bennett do it?" Elias did not look at her. "I have spent 53 years not answering that question, Mrs. Holloway." Maren. He turned then and his eyes were very clear. "I have spent 53 years not answering it because I had no proof and a lot of mortgage. I'm 80 next year. I have no mortgage now. So I will tell you what I think. I think Silas would not have left this land. I think he would not have left his work. I think he was the kind of man who, when he disappeared, did so because somebody made him disappear. And I think his brother knew exactly where the shovel was." He pulled a drawer open behind him and lifted out a folded map. He set it on the table next to hers. He smoothed it open. It was a hand-drawn survey. Same coordinates, same shaded veins, but more detailed in the eastern shelf where Silas's own copy thinned out into question marks. "He gave me this the week before he disappeared," Elias said. "Told me to hold it. Said if he came back for it, fine. Said if he didn't, I would know what to do with it when the time came." His finger touched the corner of the map. "I have had this in a drawer for 53 years, Maren. I am giving it to you because the time came." She drove back up the ridge with the map folded inside her coat against her ribs. That night, she and Wyatt sat by the fire and laid all three maps side by side on the floor. Her copy, Silas's copy, Elias's copy. They overlapped at every key point. The eastern shelf where Silas had drawn his question marks, Elias's copy filled in. A mineral vein, high grade, and running directly through it in red pencil in Silas's own hand the words "Do not drill, water table." Wyatt traced the red line with his finger. He wasn't hiding Silver Mom. No, he was hiding a reason to leave the mountain alone. She looked at her son in the firelight. 12 years old, his hazel green eyes serious as a man's. "Yes, baby." That's exactly what he was doing. A long quiet settled between them. The fire moved on the walls. Then Wyatt said very softly, "Dad never worked on anything with me. Not like this." She did not trust herself to speak. She put her arm around her son and pulled him against her side, and she let the fire crack in the silence. And after a while she felt him fall asleep with his head on her shoulder. She sat there a long time after that, not moving, not wanting to move, watching the three maps in the firelight, listening to her boy breathe. That was the night Elias's tool shed burned. They did not hear about it until morning when he drove up himself in his old Bronco ash still in the creases of his coat. He stood on her porch with his hat in his hand. "Wasn't lightning, Maren?" "No." "Wasn't an accident?" "No." He looked past her into the cabin where Wyatt was eating oatmeal at the broken table. They don't send messages, Elias said, unless somebody's listening. She felt something settle inside her chest, cold and clean, almost like relief. Then we make sure they know we are listening, she said. The cease and desist arrived that afternoon, hand-delivered by a man in a corporate parka who would not give his name. He stood on the porch and held a clipboard out and did not step closer. Maren read it standing in the doorway. Legal language, threats of criminal trespass, the invocation of a state mineral statute she had never heard of. Hargrove consolidated holdings claiming the entire parcel under an emergency mineral utility exemption. She handed it back without signing. "You tell Leland Thorne," she said quietly, "that I read his letter and I'm not impressed." The man's eyes flickered at the name. "Just a hair, enough." "Tell him yourself," he said. "He will be here soon enough." He left. She called Holden that night. "They are trying to use a public utility exemption," he said when she read him the document. "It's a stretch. It will not hold up. But it does not have to hold up. It only has to stall you. That is what they are doing now. They are stalling and they are waiting to see whether you frighten. I am not frightening. I am beginning to notice that Maren." She heard the smile in his voice, the first one she had heard from him. "What's next?" "Next, we widen the field. Silas's documents alone are powerful, but they are 60 years old. We need something current, something that proves Hargrove is still doing what Silas accused them of doing then. His notebook mentions an unauthorized drainage system on the eastern shelf. If that system still exists, if they never shut it down, that is a live environmental violation. And a live violation is something the EPA cannot ignore." "You want me to go look?" "I want you to consider going to look. Carefully. At night. With Elias not alone. Sample bottles, a camera. Nothing fancy. Photographs of pipes. Photographs of discoloration in the snow. A few ounces of water in clean glass. That is all we need to start." She lowered her voice. Wyatt was asleep across the room. "And if they catch me out there?" A long pause. "Then you make sure you are not the one who gets caught." They went 2 nights later. Maren, Wyatt, and Elias, red filters taped over their flashlights. Empty sample jars in a small canvas bag. They followed an old forestry trace east along the base of the ridge, picking their way over deadfall and frozen creek beds. And after an hour and 20 minutes, Elias raised a hand and stopped them. He pointed. Half buried under brush and old snow, a row of rusted pipes ran along the slope. 6 of them, wrist thick. The snow around them had melted in a long uneven scar, and beneath the melt the soil was the color of weak tea. There was a smell in the air, sharp, metallic, wrong. Maren crouched. She drew off her glove. She touched the nearest pipe. It was warm. 60 years after Silas had drawn his red line on his map and written, "Do not drill," the pipes he had refused to sign for were still running. She filled 3 sample jars from the runoff. Elias took photographs with an old field camera, the kind that used film, the kind that did not show up on anybody's wireless. Wyatt knelt beside her and held the jars steady while she capped them. His hands did not shake. Hers did. They were back at the cabin by 3 in the morning. They did not turn on a lantern. Maren wrapped the jars in a towel and slid them inside the cold water drum in the corner. They locked the door. They sat at the table in the dark and they listened to the wind and to their own breathing. And Wyatt fell asleep with his head on his arms. And Elias finally drove home as the sky began to gray. She and Wyatt slept that morning until the sun was high. She mailed the samples to the independent laboratory Holden had named. She drove them to Missoula herself 2 hours each way and watched the clerk seal them into evidence sleeves with her own name on the chain of custody form. The lab called 4 days later. Cadmium, lead, arsenic, all 3 above federal threshold. The lead alone was 11 times the limit. Holden's voice on the phone when she told him went very quiet. "Maren, they are not just covering up a 60-year-old story. They are still poisoning the watershed, right now, Today, that changes what we are doing. That changes the size of this. How big? Big enough that the people on the other side of this no longer have the option to leave you alone. She sat with that for a long moment in her kitchen, the phone against her ear, looking across the room at her son drawing at the table. "Then we go faster," she said. That night, after Wyatt was asleep, she found the dead fox on the porch. It had been laid out neatly across the top step, head pointed toward the door. There were no visible wounds. Its eyes had been removed cleanly, the way a man with patience and a small knife will remove them. Beneath the body, slid halfway under, was a folded piece of paper. She put on her gloves before she touched anything. She unfolded the paper. No words, only a drawing in heavy black pencil. A compass rose, the H inside it, and around the rose, drawn in jagged, unmistakable strokes, flames. She did not scream. She did not move for a long moment. She stood there on the porch in her coat in the cold, and she let herself feel the fear. And then she let it pass through her, the way her grandmother had once taught her, to let cold water pass over her hands at the kitchen sink without flinching. She breathed in once. She breathed out once. Then she went inside and got a shovel and a tarp, and she wrapped the fox, and she carried it off the porch and laid it gently at the base of one of the Cairns stones on the ridge, because she did not know what else to do, and because some small old part of her felt that the mountain ought to keep its own dead. When she came back, Wyatt was awake. He was sitting up in his sleeping bag. He had seen her go out. He had seen her come back. He was watching her with eyes that no longer looked 12. "Mom." "Yeah, baby." They came up to the house. "Yes." "What do we do?" She sat down on the floor next to him. She took his hands in hers. They were cold. She held them between her palms until they warmed. "We do not run," she said. "We do not stop. We do exactly what Silas could not. We stay. We file. We make this so loud that they cannot put it back in the ground." He looked at her for a long time. Then he leaned his forehead against hers the way he had when he was small, when a nightmare had woken him and he had come into her bed. "Okay, Mom." She held him until his breathing slowed. Then she went back to the table and she opened her leather journal and she began to write. Not an entry this time. An op-ed. She did not know yet who would publish it. She did not know yet whether anyone would. She only knew that the woman who had walked into a county auction house with 50 cents in her pocket and the woman now writing at this table by lantern light were no longer entirely the same woman, and that whatever was coming next was going to require the second one. She wrote until the lantern guttered. She wrote about Silas, about the floor, about the pipe still running on the eastern shelf, about a man who had loved a mountain enough to disappear for it, and a brother who had loved a balance sheet enough to let him. She wrote about her son, about a 12-year-old boy who had said of his absent father only the word okay, and who had now learned to kneel in the dark next to a poisoned pipe and hold a sample jar steady for his mother. At the bottom, beneath her name, she wrote a single line in capital letters. "You do not get to rewrite history just because you buried it." She underlined it once. She closed the journal. Outside, the wind moved through the cairns on the ridge, one stone at a time. Somewhere below the cabin, beneath the floorboards, she had pried up, and the floorboards she had not yet touched. The rest of Silas Hargrove's life waited in oilcloth and wax patient, as it had been for 60 winters. She did not know yet that an 81-year-old man in a coat too thin for the season was at that moment driving north out of Bozeman with a key in his pocket and a brother's name on his mouth. She did not know yet that he was coming to her door. She only knew, sitting there in the lantern light with her son asleep across the room and a dead fox laid carefully on a cairn she had not built, that she was not going to be the one who flinched. The fire cracked. The cabin held. The mountain in the dark beyond the windows kept its counsel and waited. He came up the road just after dark. Maren heard the engine before she saw the headlights. a heavy old sedan moving slowly. The kind of slow that meant the driver knew he was expected, even if no one had told her he was coming. She stood at the front window with the lantern turned low and watched the headlights crawl up the last switchback. Beside her, Wyatt held the 22 with both hands. She had not asked him to. He had simply gotten up from the table when he heard the engine and lifted it down from above the door, and she had not stopped him. The sedan stopped at the bottom of the porch. The engine cut. A man climbed out. He was tall once you could see it in the frame, though age had bent him a little at the shoulders. White hair under a wool cap, a wool coat too thin for this mountain. He stood beside the car for a moment in the snow and looked up at the cabin like a man looking at a grave. Then he walked up the porch steps and he stopped at the door and he took off his hat. Mrs. Holloway. She did not open the door. My name is Bennett Hargrove. I am Silas's brother. I am 81 years old and I am alone, and I am not here on behalf of the company. I am here because I saw your name on the preservation filing, and I owe my brother more than the silence I have given him for 53 years. I will stand on this porch all night if that is what you require. But if you let me in, I have something to give you that no one else in the world can give you. She stood with her hand on the door for a long moment. Wyatt looked at her. The hazel green eyes, his grandfather's chin, her own steady fear. Mom, he has Silas's face. She opened the door. She did not put down the rifle. She kept it across her arms while Bennett came in and stood, hat in his hands, just inside the threshold. She motioned him to the broken chair by the fire. He sat. He laid the hat on his knee. Why now? She said. He looked at the fire for a long time before he answered. Because I saw the photograph in the paper. The fox on your porch. The compass rose burning. I know who drew that picture. I have known him for 40 years. His name is Roy Granger, and he works for a man named Leland Thorne. And Leland Thorne is the man who runs the company my father built, and my brother died trying to stop. And I sat in my kitchen in Bozeman with that newspaper in my hands. Mrs. Holloway and I thought, I am going to die soon, and if I die without doing this, then I will have spent my entire life being the wrong brother. His voice cracked on the last word. He did not cry. He simply held very still the way an old man holds still when he knows that any movement might let something out he cannot put back. I do not need your forgiveness, he said. I have not earned it. I am here because Silas left something behind that requires 2 signatures, and I am the second signature, and I have been waiting 53 years for the first one to walk into the world. He reached into his coat. He drew out a small key on a leather cord. He laid it on the table. There is a safe deposit box at a private bank in Bozeman, he said, in a name that is not mine and not his. The box has a 2-signature lock. I have 1 key. The other was left for whoever came to this cabin and read the letter under the floor. I assume you have read the letter. I have read the letter. Then you are the other key. She looked down at the small thing on the table. A key. Just a key. Brass worn smooth on its bow from being carried in a pocket for half a century. What is in the box? He looked at her. Everything, he said quietly. Everything he could not put under your floor. They drove to Bozeman in the morning, all 3 of them. She would not leave Wyatt at the cabin alone, and she would not let Bennett out of her sight. And so they went together in her old pickup. Bennett in the passenger seat with his hat on his knee and Wyatt wedged between them, and the snow came down soft and steady across the highway for 2.5 hours. The bank was small, discreet, the kind of place that did not advertise. The manager took Bennett's signature first, then Maren's, and then he led them into a back room with no windows and slid out a long flat box and set it on the table and left them alone. Bennett did not open it. He looked at Maren. It should be you. She lifted the lid. Inside, neatly arranged, lay 3 cassette tapes in clear plastic cases labeled in Silas's clean, controlled hand. A thick leather journal twice the size of the one she had found under the floor, and a sealed envelope. The envelope had no name on it, only a single sentence across the front in that same handwriting, "To the one the mountain trusts." Maren did not pick up the envelope. Not yet. She picked up the first cassette. "Do you have a way to play these?" she asked. "I have a player in the car," Bennett said. "I bought it last week. I've been carrying it with me. I did not know yet who I was going to listen with." They sat in her truck in the bank's back lot, engine running for the heat snow falling on the windshield, and they pressed play. The hiss came first, the thin hiss of magnetic tape that had been sitting in a vault for half a century. Then a small dry sound, a throat being cleared, and then a voice, a young voice, calm, tired. The voice of a man in his 20s who had already decided how the story was going to end. "This is Silas Thomas Hargrove. Today is the 2nd of March, 1971. If you are hearing this, then I have failed to protect the ridge myself. That does not mean the ridge is lost. It means the ridge is waiting for someone with more courage than I had." Maren put her hand on Wyatt's shoulder. She did not look at Bennett. She could hear him breathing through his nose, slow and careful, the way a man breathes when he is trying not to make a sound. "They have forged the filings," Silas said. "They have paid the land registrar in Ravalli County for 9 years to lose specific paperwork. They have falsified a watershed study to hide the drainage on the eastern shelf. I have copies of all of this. I am putting the copies in the box. I am putting the originals under the floor. I said no to my brother 3 times this winter. He told me the last time that I was making it harder than it needed to be. I told him that some things are supposed to be hard. He did not answer me. He left the cabin and he did not come back. And that is how I know the time is short." A pause. The tape hissed. "I do not hate Bennett," Silas said. "I think he believes what he is doing is survival. But survival that crushes others is not living. It is just extending your guilt across more years." Beside her in the cab of the truck, the 81-year-old man who had spent 53 years extending his guilt across more years began very quietly to cry. He did not sob. He did not shake. He simply sat with his hands flat on his knees and let the tears run down the deep lines of his face and into his collar, and he made no move to wipe them away. The tape played on. Silas named names: the registrar, 2 state officials, a bank in Helena, a drilling foreman who had signed 3 different reports for the same site under 3 different dates. He read coordinates. He read the names of the witnesses whose affidavits sat under the floor. He read at the end a list of things he wanted done with the land if no one ever came. A trust, a scholarship, a retreat center for children from mining towns who had never been told that the mountain could be anything other than a thing to take from. "I'm not afraid of dying," Silas said at the end of the first tape. "I'm afraid of dying and having no one know what I died for. So I am leaving this to whoever finds it. The mountain is alive. It remembers. Please, whoever you are, remember with it." The tape clicked off. No one spoke for a long time. Then Bennett said in a voice that did not sound like an old man's voice anymore, that sounded like a younger man's voice trapped a long way down inside an old body, "I did not kill him." Maren waited. "I did not kill him," Bennett said again. "I want you to know that. I would not lie to you about it now, but I knew. I knew that Leland's father was going to make him disappear, and I knew it for 3 days before it happened, and I did not warn him. I told myself I did not know for sure. I told myself my brother was being dramatic. I told myself 1,000 things, Mrs. Holloway, and not one of them was the truth. And the truth was that I was afraid of losing the company. And so I sat at my kitchen table for 3 days, and I did nothing. And on the 4th day, my brother was gone." Wyatt was looking at him with very wide eyes. Maren reached across her son and put her hand on Bennett's wrist. She did not say it was all right. It was not all right. She only let her hand rest there briefly, the way you rest a hand on something, to let it know you have heard it. Then she took her hand back. She put the truck in drive. She drove them all back to the ridge. Holden was waiting at the cabin when they got home. She had called him from a gas station outside Butte. He had driven up from Missoula in the dark with a digital recorder and a portable cassette deck and a notepad, and he listened to the 3 tapes straight through, twice taking notes the whole time, and when it was done, he sat back in the broken chair, and he looked at Maren, and he said one word. Now. Now what? Now you call the journalist. Now we leak. Now we make this so big that they cannot reach for you without the entire country watching. She nodded once. Sloane Whitcomb of the Northwest Ledger answered on the second ring. She listened for 40 minutes without interrupting. At the end, she said, I want the op-ed in your own voice, and I want it tonight. The tapes go up Friday morning. We run it on the front page. Are you ready for what that does to your life? Maren looked across the cabin at her son, asleep now in his sleeping bag, and at Bennett dozing in the broken chair, and at Holden watching her with the patience of a man who had spent 30 years waiting for this exact phone call. My life already did this to itself, she said. I am just catching up. The op-ed went out at midnight. The tapes went up at 6. By noon Friday, the story was everywhere. By dusk Friday, Hargrove Consolidated stock had dropped 19%, and Leland Thorne had called an emergency press conference from behind closed doors, and the EPA had issued a temporary halt on all operations within 40 miles of the Bitterroot. Roy Granger came back that night. He did not come alone, but he came first ahead of the man with him, because he was the kind of man who liked to walk in first. He kicked the front door at 11:46. The frame held. He kicked it again. The frame splintered. Maren was already up. She had been up. She had been sleeping in shifts since the Fox 2 hours on 2 hours off, and the rifle was in her hands before the second kick landed. Wyatt was in the back room. Holden was in Missoula. Bennett had driven down the mountain that afternoon to file a sworn deposition with the federal marshal's office and was not yet back. She was alone. The door gave on the third kick. Granger came in fast, the way a man comes in when he has done this before, and behind him she heard a second set of boots on the porch. He had a gas can in his left hand. He had a lighter in his right. He did not have a gun. He did not need a gun. He had brought fire. He saw her in the lantern light. He saw the rifle. He smiled. You are not going to shoot me, sweetheart. Maren did not answer. She shot the wall behind his head. The crack of the rifle was enormous in the cabin. Splinters of pine exploded out of the log 8 inches above Granger's left ear. He flinched. He swore. The lighter dropped from his hand and clattered on the floor. Then a small shape came out of the back room running, and Wyatt threw the lantern. He threw it underhand the way she had taught him to throw a softball, low and hard, and it hit Granger in the chest and broke, and the oil splashed across his coat. And for one terrible second, she thought he was going to catch fire. But the wick went out as it fell, and the oil only soaked him, and the lantern shattered at his feet. And Granger went down, slipping on the spilled oil, hitting the floorboards hard on one knee. Maren was on him before he could get up. She did not think. She did not plan. She drove the stock of the rifle down across his back between the shoulder blades, and he went flat, and she put her knee on the back of his neck, the way she had once seen a vet hold down a kicking calf, and she said very quietly, "Stay down." He stayed down. The second man, the one on the porch, ran. She heard his boots going back down the steps. She heard his truck start. She heard him peel out down the gravel. Granger did not move under her knee. Wyatt was standing in the doorway of the back room with his hands at his sides. His face was white. His breath was coming in small, fast catches. He was not crying. He was looking at his mother on the back of a grown man with a rifle in her hands, and he was not crying. "Wyatt." "Yes, Mom." "Get the cord from the curtain, the one in the front window." "Yes, Mom." He brought it. She tied Granger's wrists behind him, with knots her father had taught her when she was 9 years old on a fishing dock in Idaho. She tied them tight enough to hurt. She did not care. Then she sat down on the floor next to the man she had just brought down, and she leaned her back against the broken table, and she did not let go of the rifle. Bennett came up the road 40 minutes later. He had passed the fleeing truck on the switchback and known immediately what it meant. He came in through the broken door with his coat half on, and he saw the man on the floor, and the boy in the doorway, and the woman against the table, and he sat down on the floor beside her, and he said, "I am so sorry I was not here." "You are here now." "I am here now." The federal marshals arrived at 2 in the morning. They had been mobilized hours earlier on the strength of Bennett's deposition. They took Granger out in cuffs. They took Maren's statement. They took the splintered wood from the wall behind where Granger had stood photographed, bagged, labeled. The motion-activated camera Holden had installed on the porch the previous week had recorded every second of it. They took the memory card with white cotton gloves. Maren did not sleep that night. She sat in the broken chair by the rebuilt fire with Wyatt curled against her side, and she watched the dawn come gray and slow through the broken door frame. And she thought about all the women who had ever sat in this cabin, or one like it across the long history of this country, watching dawn come after a night that had tried to take them, and she felt very small and very old at the same time. The preliminary hearing was 3 weeks later in Missoula. The courthouse was packed, reporters in the gallery, federal officials in the front rows, Maren in a coat she had bought at the thrift store on Higgins Avenue for $19, Wyatt in the courthouse daycare, Bennett in a dark suit that had not fit him in 20 years and fit him now. Bennett took the stand first. He did not look at the defense table. He said his full name. He said his age. He said the date he had first known with certainty that his brother was going to be killed. He said the 3 days he had spent at his kitchen table doing nothing. He said it in a voice that did not shake. The room did not breathe. "I thought silence would cost me less," he said, looking at the judge. "It turns out it cost me everything." Holden put the tapes into evidence. He put the lab results into evidence. He put the camera footage of Granger and the gas can into evidence. He put the affidavits from under the floor, now authenticated by 3 independent document examiners, into evidence. Then Maren took the stand. She did not look at notes. She did not have notes. "I did not go looking for any of this," she said. "I bought a cabin for 50 cents because it was all I had left. I was trying to give my son a roof, and the cabin gave me a man instead. A man who has been dead for 53 years and who left his life under the floor for whoever the mountain chose next. I am not anybody special. I am a mother. I am a woman who used to do payroll for a regional trucking company before my marriage ended and the trucking company folded. I am not a journalist. I am not an activist. I am the person who happened to raise her hand at the right auction on the right day. And I am telling you what I found. And I am telling you that if you bury it again, you bury me with it. Because I am not going home and pretending I did not see what I saw." She stopped. The judge looked at her for a long moment. Then a door at the back of the courtroom opened, and a woman walked in. She was in her late 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back, a tan canvas tote bag over one shoulder. She walked up the aisle with the bag held in both hands in front of her like an offering. And she stopped at the prosecutor's table, and she said in a clear, flat Montana voice, "My name is Margaret Holloran. I have been the chief financial controller of Hargrove Consolidated Holdings for 22 years. I have in this bag every internal memorandum Leland Thorne has signed since 1998 authorizing the concealment of contamination on the eastern shelf. I have been waiting 26 years for a woman brave enough to make this worth doing." She set the bag on the table. The room exploded. Leland Thorne was led from the gallery in handcuffs 40 minutes later. 2 days after that, the federal magistrate granted the preservation petition in full and reclassified the entire Upper Willow Creek parcel as a federal conservation zone, with Maren Holloway named as provisional steward pending final designation. Spring came late that year, but it came. The cabin had not survived. Granger had not managed to burn it, but the federal forensic team had taken it apart board by board to document everything beneath the floor, and what was left of it was a foundation, 4 walls, and a chimney. Maren did not rebuild the cabin. She left the chimney standing, and she built something else on the same ground, a long, low cedar building with wide windows facing east. The Silas Hargrove Conservation Learning Center. The first cohort of 20 teenagers arrived in May. Kids from Anaconda and Butte and Roundup. Kids from mining towns whose grandfathers had worked for Hargrove and whose fathers had worked for what Hargrove had become, and who had been told their whole lives that the only thing the mountain was good for was what you could take out of it. Bennett taught the geology unit. He was 82 by then. He stood in front of the kids in a clean flannel shirt and explained in plain language how to read a stream for poison and how to look at a cut bank and tell whether the soil had been honest with you. He told them on the last morning of the first session the story of his brother. He did not soften the part about the 3 days at the kitchen table. The kids listened with the stillness that 12-year-olds get when an old man finally tells the truth in front of them. Elias Thornwood trained the volunteer rangers. He died the following winter in his sleep in the cedar cabin at Lone Horse Creek. He left Maren the hand-drawn map. Wyatt grew 3 inches that summer. He took to walking the ridge alone in the evenings with a notebook sketching the Cairns. He asked her one night by the fire of the new center whether she thought Silas had known. Known what, baby? That it would be us. That a woman with 50 cents and a kid was going to be the one. She thought about it for a long time. I think he hoped, she said. I think hope was all he had. And I think hope, when you leave it under a floor long enough, sometimes finds the right hands. Derek called in June, her ex-husband. He had seen her on television. He wanted to see his son. She listened to him on the phone in the parking lot of the new center, with the spring wind in the pines around her. And when he was finished, she said, "You can write him a letter, Derek. You can write him as many letters as you want. Whether he answers is up to him." She hung up. She did not cry. She did not feel triumphant either. She felt only the small, clean feeling of a door that had finally been hung straight on its hinges. That night, she walked up the ridge alone. She climbed past the first cairn and the second and the third. She climbed until she reached the bench they had set into the crest facing west, looking out over the entire valley. She sat down. She took out the envelope. To the one the mountain trusts. She had not opened it yet. She had been waiting. She had not known for what. She opened it now. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper. One sentence in Silas Hargrove's clean, steady hand. "You cannot preserve the land by owning it. You preserve it by loving it in public." She held the paper for a long time in the last light of the day. Then she took a pen out of her coat pocket, and she wrote one line beneath his in her own hand. And by refusing to let anyone silence what the earth remembers, she folded the paper. She put it back in the envelope. She put the envelope in her pocket. Below her, the valley went gold, then rose, then blue. The pines along the ridge stood quiet. Somewhere out across the slope, a single raven called once into the dusk, the way it had called the morning she first drove up that road with her son asleep beside her, and 40 acres of nothing in her name. She thought about the woman who had walked into that auction house with the last 50 cents in her pocket. She thought about the woman who was sitting now on this bench on a mountain that was no longer for sale. They were not. She understood entirely the same woman. But they were close enough. She stood up. She started back down the trail toward the lights of the center, where her son was waiting, and where the windows were warm, and where a fire was already going in the long stone hearth, at the heart of a building that bore the name of a man who had hidden everything he could not say under a floor, and trusted against all reason that someone would one day come and lift the boards. The mountain held its breath behind her. Then, very slowly, it exhaled.